During the Vietnam War, troops whispered about strange sightings deep in the jungle. Not Viet Cong, nor NBA, but tall, pale figures with blue eyes, spotted far behind friendly lines, sniper rifles slung over their shoulders, vanishing like ghosts into the trees. Rumors swirled about these not being local fighters, but members of the Spetsnaz, elite Soviet operatives sent to carry out missions so covert that their existence could never be confirmed. These were men trained for the most aggressive form of warfare, from taking out enemies underwater to storming royal palaces and erasing heads of state. Shaped by a training regime so brutal and controversial, some recruits have even lost limbs before completing the program. But when the Spetsnaz marched into Ukraine in early 2022, something changed. Russia's most feared fighters had finally met their match. As the night descended upon the ridges surrounding the once regal Tajbeg Palace on December 27, 1979, Afghan guards stationed around the perimeter spotted shadows weaving through the moonlight. Inside the palace, President Hafizullah Amin sat with his family. Whispers had long warned that his life was at risk, with Soviet intelligence having labeled him a, quote, smooth-talking fascist who was secretly pro-Western. As the guards raised their rifles, eyes locked on the approaching silhouettes, they noticed these didn't look like ordinary Soviet soldiers. The intruders wore loose-fitting Afghan robes, sporting no helmets, nor any visible protection against bullets. The Afghan defenders shouted warnings, ordering them to turn around and go back to where they came from. The strangers' response was to pull out rifles and start raining bullets on the guards. One way or another, they were coming into the palace. These were not regular soldiers. They were Spetsnaz, Soviet special forces trained for war without rules. They moved with the confidence of predators, weaving between bullets, breaching rooms, slaughtering elite guards one after another. By the time they reached the main corridors of the palace, they'd already left hundreds of bodies behind. When they finally breached President Amin's chambers, barely 40 minutes after the start of the invasion, the head of state knew his life was over. The official report would come shortly after on the local radio, with anchors declaring how a revolutionary trial had deemed him guilty of crimes against the state. A sentence had been set, and, quote, that sentence had been carried out. Born to serve the Soviet Union's far-reaching ambitions, the men of the Russian Spetsnaz functioned as instruments of reconnaissance, sabotage, counterinsurgency, and covert warfare beyond the nation's borders. Military analysts have tried to draw similarities to the U.S. 75th Ranger Regiment or Britain's 16th Air Assault Brigade. However, those comparisons fall short, as Spetsnaz units operate on an entirely different spectrum, where the unwritten rules of warfare are never an obstacle to fulfilling their goals. In 2007, Edward Koltsov, a former Soviet frogman from the Spetsnaz, went on public record to recount an alleged covert operation from 1956. When patrolling beneath the waves near the Soviet cruiser Ordzhonikidze, he encountered British naval officer Lionel Crabb, allegedly on a surveillance mission. Koltsov claimed he determined that Crabb intended to plant a mine on the hull and proceeded to engage the British diver in an underwater duel that ended with Crabb's demise. His body was then presumably disposed of, and his fate kept a secret for decades. It's precisely this stone-cold yet extremely efficient approach that has allowed Spetsnaz to stay operational to this day, with an estimated 17,000 active personnel, serving as Russia's favorite weapons and carrying out operations the world will likely never hear about in Chechnya, Georgia, Crimea, Donbas, Syria, and beyond. Always remaining faithful to their trademark controversial tactics. In theory, any Russian can aspire to wear the crimson beret of the Spetsnaz. In reality, only a handful can survive the training it takes to become a member of the Special Forces. The program begins after standard military training, and from the very beginning, the system is set to weed out the weak and sharpen the most reliant cadets into unrepentant assassins. Spetsnaz aspirants are thrown into live-fire obstacle courses, sprinting through trenches and leaping over barriers as live bullets whip past their heads, courtesy of instructors who don't believe in blanks. Hand-to-hand combat is not softened by protective gear and mattresses on the floor. Spetsnaz trainees engage in bare-knuckle, no-holds-barred fights, drawing from sambo, judo, Krav Maga, and brutal street brawling. Broken bottles, knives, even chairs, Anything that could be used in a real fight is fair game. In one of the most controversial exercises, recruits are said to be locked in a pitch-black cellar with starving, rabid dogs, armed with nothing but an entrenching shovel, or sometimes nothing at all. Their mission: survive by whatever means it takes. Whether this exercise is real or a Russian myth spun for propaganda is still debated. Still, there's no doubt about the Spetsnaz training regimen ranking among the most demanding in the world. Born during an era when the Soviet Union obsessed over physical supremacy, the Spetsnaz program borrowed heavily from the scientific regiments that produced Soviet Olympic champions. Archival footage shows men hurling kettlebells at each other, enhancing hand-eye coordination and raw power. They're made to haul boulders and logs across snow-covered mountains, training for the unforgiving terrain of real-world operations. But Spetsnaz are not just brute force, and they are also taught different languages, how to mimic local customs, and vanish into foreign cities. They learn to survive alone in the wilderness for weeks, to extract intelligence, to eliminate a target without being seen, and to parachute from aircraft into enemy territory. For those who specialize even further, the training only intensifies. Cadets may be sent into the frigid waters of the Black Sea to master combat diving, underwater demolitions, and covert submarine insertion tactics. Others learn canoe stealth landings, beach assaults, and underwater fighting. By the time the training is complete, those who remain are no longer ordinary soldiers. They are fighting machines. Given their fearsome reputation, it was no surprise that when Russia launched its Ukraine invasion in 2022, the Spetsnaz were among the first to be unleashed. Convoys of Spetsnaz operators advanced on key Ukrainian cities such as Kharkiv, Donbas, and Mariupol, said to be tasked with eliminating top officials, including President Volodymyr Zelensky, expecting to cripple Ukraine's defenses before a counterattack could even be organized through their unconventional warfare and rapid strike techniques. However, this time, the Russian Spetsnaz found themselves on a different battlefield. Unlike past enemies, Ukraine did not collapse. Instead, it kept making the Special Forces fight for every single street they sought to capture. In Kharkiv, a detachment of Spetsnaz took refuge inside Specialist School No. 134, converting its classrooms into fortified firing positions. But almost immediately, Ukrainian defenders surrounded the building, cutting off escape routes and demanding surrender. But conceding had never been part of the Spetsnaz vocabulary. Most of the Ukrainian fighters weren't even soldiers. They were police officers and volunteers with little combat experience, yet they didn't hesitate to step into the building, rifles raised, backs against walls, and eyes flicking across every chalkboard and overturned desk, knowing that a single mistake meant everything could be over. It wasn't long before the hallways turned into a war of trenches, gunfire erupting back and forth across narrow corridors. A Ukrainian soldier with the codename Balu would later recall about the Spetsnaz agents they found inside the school, quote, "They were very professional. They didn't make a single unnecessary movement or take a single unnecessary shot." After hours of fighting, the Ukrainians had managed to push the Spetsnaz upstairs. Yet they knew they couldn't keep this up for long, and the commander ended up ordering the evacuation of the building. Outside, the defenders took cover as a Ukrainian tank rolled into position, the turret slowly swiveling to face the school. It opened fire and kept going until a final round struck the school's main gas line. 1 year after the Spetsnaz's deployment into Ukraine, a leak of U.S. military intelligence revealed just how grim the situation had turned for the Special Forces. According to satellite images and top-level assessments, quote, "All but one of 5 Russian separate Spetsnaz brigades that returned from combat operations in Ukraine in late summer 2022 suffered significant losses. According to uncovered intelligence, one brigade was hit particularly hard, reportedly returning with just 125 men active out of the 900 originally deployed. What makes the situation so damaging for the Russian war effort is that the Kremlin can't just replace Spetsnaz units. Unlike the tens of thousands of conscripts Russia can summon from across its territory, these elite fighters have to first undergo the rigorous training process it takes to form a Special Forces fighter. Some Western estimates suggest that it could take Russia up to a decade to rebuild its Spetsnaz forces to pre-war strength, and that timeline doesn't account for ongoing losses, which will likely only keep rising. Just last year, Ukrainian troops reported that Spetsnaz units had been descending onto the trenches with advanced weapons and night vision goggles, conducting raids through small groups late at night, aimed at surprising and overwhelming defenders while attacking from as many angles as possible. Although Ukraine has managed to keep its ground against a full rundown from Russia's special forces, some key locations have fallen to the enemy, suggesting that even upon suffering devastating losses, the Spetsnaz will not leave Ukraine anytime soon.